we are now kind of at a new equilibrium, a new steady state for the economy in terms of how much working from home there is.
What have you found with how productivity factors into how many days you're at home versus at work?
Yeah, so that is basically the million-dollar question. There's two things that struck me from those findings. What I would worry about is if you give employees basically 100% choice, then you have no coordination. We basically asked people, what number of working from home days would be best for your mental health? And it's now about...
Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Heroes of Hybrid Work. On today's pod, I'm very excited to welcome Jose Maria Barrero, Assistant Professor of Finance at ITAM Business School and Applied Economist with interests in finance, macro, and labor. Jose co-founded Work From Home Research with Stanford professor and economist Nick Bloom, a project that studies the shift to working from home and its implications for businesses, managers, and workers in the US and around the world, and why he's joining us as a hero of hybrid work today. Jose, thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, glad to be here. Thanks.
Awesome. So let's start a little bit with your background and who you are and what led your interest in work from home research.
Yeah, so absolutely. So I'm an economist. I did my PhD at Stanford with Nick Bloom, who's one of my co-founders on WFH Research. And basically I did my PhD working on how to survey businesses about what's going on and basically how they think about the future. So that sounded very fundamental, but I mean, basically we're just trying to think about how do business managers forecast their sales, which is like the top line item that they should be worried about, looking a year ahead. And so that was with a monthly survey, and it was very useful because you can get basically information in real time. And this contrasts, for example, with government surveys, which many of them are done once a month, but they need to be vetted. The data needs to be cleaned. And so the data release comes, I think at best, the month after. Right. Mm-hmm. And so the story of WFH Research is one where we were already working on these monthly surveys, trying to get information out there at a time when everything was going on at the same time. We had locked down. Every new day, it seemed like something new was happening, and kind of the movements in the economy were huge. And we realized in May of 2020, so this was like a couple of months into lockdown, that there was not really good and in particular timely data on working from home.
That's true.
And we realized that we were in a position where if we started running a survey of a few thousand individuals in the US, we could get and we designed the questions that we wanted to ask. We could get good information off the ground very quickly. And so the rest is sort of history in the sense that we did that in May 2020. In June, we were a little bit slow. So we did that kind of in July of 2020, and we've done it once a month ever since then.
Wow.
So we've been, releasing and tracking working from home basically in real time ever since then.
It's pretty incredible to think about how everybody was so scared during those times and worried. And here you are, putting your stake in the ground as we're going to really start tracking this to help people create great work environments, even though, right, we're stuck at home and have no idea what we're doing. So tell me a little bit about how remote work has evolved since you put your stake in the ground in May of 2020. And, what is it looking like now?
Yeah, absolutely. So maybe let me take a step back and think about the main statistic that we track for remote work is the share of paid days that are working from home days.
Okay.
And so the reason for this is I think many professionals and managers do at least some working from home. They check their email in the morning, in the evening, maybe finish something again in the morning or in the evening. That's not really what we were interested in. We were interested in people staying home or staying basically away from the work site for the entire day. And so with that preface, let me tell you, in May of 2020, our estimate for the share of paid days that were being done from home was absolutely huge. It was something like 60% in our data.
Yeah.
And so that's partly because basically anybody who could work from home was doing it full time.
Yep.
And also, really, this was during lockdown. So a lot of the people who couldn't just weren't working at all.
Yep.
Right. And so that raises kind of the days that were being done, just so many of them were being done remotely.
Mm-hmm.
Since then, that number has dropped consistently, so it's dropped up from 60% all the way down to about 28% currently. But kind of the interesting thing to me is since about the middle of 2022, and certainly from early 2023, it's been very stable at that 28%. So it looks like we are now kind of at a new equilibrium, a new steady state for the economy in terms of how much working from home there is.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah. And that makes a lot of sense to me. And so I guess the question now is, maybe for the past, since May of 2020, is how many days should you work from home? And how many should you go into the office? What's the average, and what are you seeing out there?
Yeah, so the average is maybe about 2.5 days for people who can work from home, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, this concept of who can work from home and who should is really the operating.
Mm-hmm.
Is really the operating word in this discussion, because so a lot of the economy just can't work from home, right? So a lot of people in the economy work in warehouses and restaurants. They need to be on site to provide their services. So we need to think about this question. We need to narrow in on typically the knowledge jobs that can be done remotely over the internet with a computer.
Sure. And
even then, I think so. The average for that group is maybe 2.5 days at home per week. So for most people are coming into the work site 3 days and are staying home 2 days. The interesting thing is there's still a lot of dispersion there in the sense that there's a lot of people who can afford to come into work 1 day a week. There's a lot of people who can afford to come in 4 days a week. And depending on the activities that you're doing, that's going to vary. So take my job, for example. So one of the activities that I do is just not very well suited to working from home, and that is teaching undergraduate students.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Right? You can imagine they're much easier to engage if you're in person. They still fiddle around on their laptops every now and then, but it's kind of, if they're there, you can give them a pop quiz, you can talk to them. Yeah. That's just an activity that works much better in person. And so I happen to do all my teaching on 1 day a week. So in certain situations, I might be able to get away with coming into the work site just 1 day a week.
Okay.
But for other people, if you have regular meetings with your manager, with the people you supervise, and if these are big meetings where you need to make decisions and really spend a couple of hours together, you really want to be coming in probably more often. So it maybe this is a long-winded way of saying it really depends on the job. Mm-hmm. Even within industries, it's going to vary depending on the job that you're doing, right? So even if you work in finance, I guess there aren't any bank tellers anymore, but compare within a bank teller has to be there every day a week. The CEO might want to be there a lot.
Sure.
But some middle manager might be able to do a lot of their job over the internet and just come in a couple of days a week.
Yeah, totally agree with you. I think teaching should be done in person. I had 2 little kids at home during the pandemic, so I'm right there with you. I think teaching in person, and then how that translates into the work world with mentoring, is also really helpful to be in person. Having that unstructured time with your people to ask you questions on the fly, even modeling the correct behavior in the workplace is much better seen in person. I think most of us out here are trying to still figure that out, how to get your junior employees in so that they can really start to see how work works. So, question about productivity. What have you found with how productivity factors into how many days you're at home versus at work?
Yeah, so that is basically the $1 million question.
Yeah.
And I think we have evidence from many different sources about this. So, for example, my co-author and and collaborator Nick Bloom has done a couple of experiments with a Chinese tech firm where they randomized some fraction of their workforce to be hybrid and some fraction to be fully remote. And so the original experiment was with call center workers. And they found that basically when workers worked from home, they worked a little bit longer during the day. So basically they were less distracted if they were sitting in a home office for much of the day and didn't have other people around. And so they did a little bit more work. And so that means that they were more productive on a per day basis, but perhaps not on a per hour basis. They did a second experiment more recently with the knowledge workers at the same firm. So I think the finance department, the professionals, the engineers, this is a tech company. And basically they found people were much more satisfied. The turnover in employees was lower, which is, I mean, I think we have a lot of evidence that people like working from home. And so that on its own, I think is going to make the company more efficient, just not having to churn through workers all of the time. But in terms of performance, for these sorts of knowledge jobs like engineering, et cetera, it's hard to measure their performance. And they didn't find anything negative there. So maybe it might be mildly positive, but it's hard to tell.
Yeah, I just spoke with Christina Luconi. She's the Chief People Officer at Rapid7. And she was talking about how there's a difference between getting stuff done, which you get a lot of stuff done when you're working at home, and actually connecting with each other, ideating, being creative, brainstorming work.
Yeah.
So I think also what comes into play here is the actual definition of productivity. Is it getting stuff done, right?
Absolutely. So maybe putting my wonky economist hat on, I think one of the bigger things that we've found, and so we're still writing up these results, but it's that if you think about it, in 2019, we lived in a world where we had to everybody had to sink a couple of hours going into work and coming back in order to do the job that you have to do. Nowadays, there's a big chunk of the economy and in particular, a lot of highly productive individuals. So a lot of the more knowledge intensive people who produce more in value added terms don't have to sink these hours in the morning and the afternoon. So really that very fact means that we're producing the same amount in less time, because to the extent that you think that this commuting time was basically dead time. And that's something that basically you can't take it away. Even if you think you're more easily distracted at home or you're a little bit more lazy, that time that you save, you really can't take it away from people. And we should count it as added productivity, at least from an economics sense. I mean, maybe the government statistics aren't going to capture this, but I think from a societal point of view, it is added efficiency.
Yeah. I think that kind of brings me to my next question, which is you surveyed a large population on how many work from home days would be best for mental health. And I have to assume that cutting your commute out for some folks is very good for your mental health. Can you talk a little bit about those findings?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think there's two things that struck me from those findings. We basically asked people, I mean, this isn't really an open-ended question. So we basically asked them, what number of working from home days would be best for your mental health? No days, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 or more a week. So where 5 or more a week is basically, the best would be if I were fully remote. And there's, as I was saying, two big things there. One is there are huge differences across people. And so if you're an organization, it's going to be hard to please everybody. And so in some sense, you might think that a middle of the road solution, like being hybrid, where you come in a couple of days a week and you stay home the rest of the week, is the middle of the ground. But that's the preferred option for a small fraction of people. And so I think that creates sort of a conundrum for organizations. That might be the safest route, but it's just going to be hard to please a lot of people. The other thing that I found is, so there were big differences by education. So workers with only a high school education were much more likely to say that zero working from home was best for their mental health than workers who had a 4-year college degree.
Interesting.
And I mean, I think this gets down to what sorts of jobs these people are doing,
Sure.
right? So a worker with only a high school education is probably doing a frontline job that requires them to be on site and maybe requires them to do something in a team. And I don't know, perhaps you could bring some of that work home, but it would be really hard for them to do it. And so being on site with the right equipment, with a team helping them is probably best. Once you're talking about a knowledge worker, where a lot of what we do is analyzing, sitting in front of a computer, reading, writing, it's a much different story.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So would you say that employee choice is a big factor here, and potentially, I think, who was it? Bethany, who was on the podcast last season, she talked about, everybody has different needs, but it's your job to kind of find out what those needs are. So as managers, it's about listening to the individual and figuring it out. Is that how can we make this data actionable in your point of view?
Yeah, I mean, I think there is some scope for organizations, for employers to try to work with the employees' needs. And I absolutely agree that ultimately it's the job of the employee to know what works better for them at least on a personal level, maybe not necessarily on a work level, but on a personal level. If what days you need to pick up your kids from school, that sort of thing. What I would worry about is if you give employees basically 100% choice, then you have no coordination. And the reason why people gather in offices at workplaces, especially for professionals and managers, it's to be together, to socialize, to get to know your colleagues, to have discussions. And so if you give 100% choice, you just can't have that other thing. So, I mean, I think you might be able to get a little bit by giving workers choice, while maintaining some guidelines about when we come in and why it is that we come in, to basically be together and do work together as knowledge workers. Maybe
I agree with that. Yeah, so I agree with that. It's finding their needs, but then coordinating so that the team is let's say it's best for people to come in once a day. Let's make sure we all come in on that day, right? Let's work together as a team to figure out what day is best, because you're right. If everyone is coming in on a different day of the week and it's one day a week, there's no point, right?
There's basically no point. And so the other thing that I would say is I think where we're going to move in the long run, at least, is to a world where different organizations are going to set up different equilibria. So basically, one office might say we come in 4 days a week. Another office might say we come in 1 or 2 days a week. And I think eventually employees with different needs and different preferences are going to gravitate towards different jobs. And I mean, I think that's fine. That's something that we should allow. And in some sense, here's my economist brain speaking. That is the market kind of reaching its most efficient point, kind of giving the people who value work from home a job where they can do that, and others who don't value it so much, not so much.
No, I think we really appreciate your economist mind, because we don't honestly have many of you on here. So please feel free to bring that perspective in. So switching topics a bit to the evolution of hiring. So most recently, you found that organizations are hiring employees who live much further away from the office. Can you talk about that finding and maybe how an employer can, again, apply that data to their organization so that they have the most hiring and retention success?
Yeah, so let me back up and tell you a little bit about how we got that finding. Yeah, so basically what we did was we partnered with a payroll processing company. And so they gave us an anonymized set of payroll processing data where, and so we don't have anybody's name or private information, but we can observe basically for employee X at some firm, basically what is the zip code of where their registered home address is, right? And we know what is the zip code or the location of where they're assigned to work. right? And this is for tax purposes, right? So everybody who has to file taxes, it depends on where you live, where your employer is located. And so what we did was we basically found what is the distance between people's home and their workplace before the pandemic. And then we started tracking that over time, and we saw that went up over time. Yeah, so around 2019, for the typical employee lived something like 10 miles away from work on average. That has crept up, and it's now about 3 times bigger than it was. So it's closer to 30 miles.
So would you say people are more likely now to hire the best talent versus how close you are to the office type of thing?
Exactly. So there's 2 things going on here. Since the pandemic, new hires are on average farther away from their workplace than they used to be. And that's exactly what I think you mentioned was going on. So in a world where remote work is possible, it is easier for me to hire the best person, even if they're not located from within commuting distance to my office. And so in that sense, working from home is a boon to employers because they can hire the best person with fewer constraints. Right. And this might not be so. And so partly, I think this is hiring fully remote employees who are located completely in a completely different part of the country. It might also be that you hire within your metropolitan area, but from a farther distance. And if you're not asking the person to come in 5 days a week, if they only have to come in maybe 1 or 2 days a week, well, they can bear that commute 1 or 2 days a week. But if doing it every day wouldn't be feasible. Sure.
Yeah.
Right. The other part is some of the existing employees have actually moved a little bit farther away from the office. And I think, again, that's because once you realize I don't have to come in every day, well, then I can afford to move a little bit farther away.
Sure. Yeah, no, it's really, really interesting. And probably ties into mental health, employee engagement, employee satisfaction, work-life balance. I think there are a lot of pros to this trend that we're seeing, including employee retention and hiring better talent. So what do you wish more employers understood as they're crafting their hybrid work policies?
I think the key things for an employer are understanding why you want people to come into the workplace. Why do you want them to be in the office? And communicating that to your employees, right? And so we've asked many questions in our survey data about basically why people like coming into work and why they like staying at home. So we've asked both kinds of questions. And the number one reason to come into work is socializing with my colleagues and collaborating in person. The number one reason why they like staying at home is basically not being able to commute and saving some money actually on gas and lunch costs and something like that. So this idea that you can ask your employees to come in most days a week or every day even, and not really specify why and not make it clear to them that they're coming in for a purpose to do their job to do a part of their job that is better done in person is problematic.
Sure.
It's a much easier ride if you tell them, hey, we're going to set up our weekly team meetings on Wednesdays and Thursdays. So we need everybody to be in there Wednesdays and Thursdays. Maybe have one optional day, maybe say Tuesday, you can choose whether it's better for you to come in or not. But then Mondays and Fridays kind of, you can do your individual job. And if you need to do quick catch-ups, we know how to do those on Zoom very efficiently. I think that works very well. What doesn't work very well is telling people, hey, you need to be in every so often. And in order to entice people, we're going to give you free lunch or free donuts at 10 a.m. Like that's just not the reason why people want to be in the office. And that's what they tell us in our survey.
That works for me. I don't know why that doesn't work for other people. I'm joking, of course. Yeah, no, I think you're bringing up a good topic of intentionality and making sure that people are there exactly for a purpose, and that it's very clear and that expectations are set. And yeah, no, everything you're saying resonates with me.
Yeah, maybe. So I've had a few conversations with people recently that have made me rethink how I think about this, because so what I just said I think works really well in organizations where you have set teams or the organization is fairly small. Imagine it's maybe 20 people. It's very easy to get kind of a one size fits all solution. But if you have kind of a big sprawling organization where you work across teams, for example, mm-hmm. and even within and across teams, different people have different kinds of meetings and so on, I think this coordination problem gets much harder. And yeah. I should be upfront about that. I mean, I think mm-hmm. it takes a lot of intentionality, and depending on the type of work that you do and how your internal organization works, it's going to be easier or harder to do that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's worth it though. You know, if I always say go slow to go fast, like do that upfront work, take the time to do it, and then it'll just take off after you do that, right? It's set. And I mean, obviously you need to keep talking to your people, continuing to get feedback on it, but doing that hard work up front to coordinate the business, I think, is extremely important. So we're coming up on time, Jose. What do you want to leave our listeners with? Is there anything you came to this podcast wanting to say that you haven't yet said?
Yeah. So, I mean, maybe going back to what is the optimal amount of remote work, I think one of the key things for me is if you look at the data, we estimate there's almost 3 times as many people in hybrid work than in fully remote work. Mm. And my interpretation of this is there's a lot of activities that knowledge workers do that are best done in person. There's a lot of activities that are done very well remotely. Mm-hmm. And so for the vast majority of people who can work from home, some in-person component is important. And that's what we see that they and their employers are choosing for a reason. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So fully remote is definitely feasible for some types of jobs, but it's not for everyone. And once we think about, or once we start thinking about working from home, really it's about hybrid that we should be thinking about.
Yeah, no, I agree with you there. A good balance is what's really showing up as the most successful across the board. So what are you curious about over the next year? Like, what do you want to learn in 2024?
Yeah, so in 2024, we're asking lots of questions about remote interactions, even for people who come into the office, right? So with my colleagues and co-authors, our hypothesis is that working from home obviously has stuck, and it's stuck because the pandemic forced us to learn how it worked, to coordinate and experiment with it all together when we were all locked down. And basically, we realized that for many activities and for many of us, it works to some degree. And so that's why it's stuck. But part of that is a familiarity with remote interactions, like talking via video conference, with doing more stuff over email, over Slack. Mm-hmm. And we think that has persisted even more so than in 2019. I think in 2019, a lot of things were done in person, on pencil and paper, sure, much more than they are now. And so now, kind of, if you need a quick check-in with somebody at your organization, you might just do it on Zoom if it's easy to do. And so, yeah. I mean, I'll give you one example. So I now talk to the students whose undergraduate theses I advise and who kind of do our RA work for me, mostly on Zoom, because that means they don't have to be on campus. We don't have to coordinate in the same place and the same time. Traffic in Mexico City can be a little bit problematic. And so that makes it just so much easier. And that, I think that's something that in 2019 I would have never done. And I think for many people who continue to come into the office, there is a good component of meetings that are either fully remote or partly remote. So partly it's with people who are not physically in the same building, that wouldn't have been there in 2019 because we became acquainted with the technology and we figured out how to work it.
Yeah, totally. All right, Jose. Well, it was a huge pleasure meeting you. How can people find you if they want to ask you some additional questions?
Yeah, so I'm on LinkedIn. I'm also so I have a personal academic website that lists all my or a bunch of my contact information. So that's jmbarrero.com. So the initials of my first and middle name and my last name.com. But if you want to learn more about this working from home research that we're doing, we have a page dedicated to that. And so that's WFHresearch.com. And so there we post updates on a monthly basis. You can sign up for a monthly newsletter. There's also all of our nerdy academic papers on there, as well as our media mentions and so on.
Awesome. I actually just found that doing research this morning, and I'm going to sign up. So I think that'd be extremely valuable to keep a pulse on. So thank you again, Jose. Pleasure meeting you. Thanks for joining us on the podcast. And we'll see you on LinkedIn.
Thank you.